Thank you all for coming here to CPW for our Meet the Artist series. My name is Sara Danziger, and I'm the education program manager here at CPW. And yeah, we're really excited to see some new faces. This is a series that we used to host every week for about 2.5 years, and we've sort of, we're now doing it every few weeks. So I'm glad that you were able to make it tonight. It's made possible this evening by generous grants from the Arnold and Augusta Newman Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts. So we're very grateful that we can host these. I have a couple announcements before we get started with our tonight's. Sorry, I'm in Sarah's seat because otherwise the camera won't pick me up. So. Our current exhibitions, which you might be seeing in this room as well as in the other galleries, Ocean Vuong, Kiana Mestrich, and Nona Faustine, as well as a show in the community gallery, can all be seen a little bit tonight after the show, after the talk, but then also are up through May 10th. So if you haven't had a chance, please check those out. They're very special. There's also some publications to go along with them, so be sure to check that out over there. We also have some really wonderful spring classes and workshops still left. If you're interested, we have, starting this weekend, we have bookbinding, 2 more series in the bookbinding. We have a Japanese stab binding, and next week is, I'm forgetting, but it's a good one, and I think it's almost sold out, and that's with Jackson Harden. Then we have frame making with Sam Margavicius. That's on 11th and 12th of April, followed by the well-realized photo book with Christian Patterson. Maybe you've heard of him. That'll be at the end of April on the 24th, 25th, and 26th, and I'm very excited about that. Followed by printing books with, actually, we have the printer and designer of the book that's being launched tonight here, Vlad Nahichavansky, in the house. He's going to be doing a workshop, an 8-week workshop where you get to make an edition of books from start to finish, using both the digital press here at CBW, but also a lot of amazing equipment over at 1080 Press. So if you have any questions, tonight would be a great night to find him. Followed by editing a body of work with Sabiha Chiman, Magnum photographer and former artist in residence here. And then toning cyanotypes with Anna Lee Clem in early June. So a lot of stuff coming up. If you want to, kind of brush up on some old skills or meet some great educators and artists, come talk to me. We have scholarships and all sorts of ways to get involved. All right, and lastly, because it relates to Sara J. Winston here, on May 5th, our photo club will be joined by 12 of the BA candidates in the photo department at Bard, and they will be presenting on projects that they've been working on very hard in the last year and sometimes for the last 4 years. So I'm excited to see what they've got going on. Last year was incredible, so I'm excited about that. Okay, tonight you're here for Meet the Artist with Sara J. Winston, who will be in conversation with Molly Prentiss, and this is also coincidentally a book launch, so I'm very excited for you all to see this incredible book that Sara has made. Sara J. Winston is a photographer and writer based in New York. She produces photographs for books and exhibitions. She writes episodic creative nonfiction. I didn't know that. And makes hybrid image textbooks. She's the author of several books, among them Sugar, Honey, Iced Tea, Foibles and Avoidance, A Lick and a Promise, and Homesick. And then now this most recent publication, Too Visceral to be Intelligent, sorry. Molly Prentiss is the author of novels Old Flame and Tuesday Nights in 1980, which was longlisted for the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize and shortlisted for the Grand Prix de Literature Américaine in France. And she lives in a one-room schoolhouse in Red Hook, New York, with her husband and daughters. Thank you all for coming and for listening to me.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. I have a moderate Grammy length thank you to start the night. I want to say thank you to Sarah, Nicole, and Kayla. You three are the life force of public programs at CPW. Thank you, Molly, for coming out tonight to be in conversation with me. Thank you, Vlad of 1080 Press, for helping make this book possible. Thank you to Arts Mid-Hudson, who was the funder for this book. And thank you to the Puffin Foundation, who also funded this book. Okay. Good job. Thanks. And also thank you to Anita Horn for coming out tonight. So I think I'll just begin by talking about the title of the book. And I'll start there because that's where all of this began. It began with the title. Last fall, I had the opportunity to write an afterword for a book that I published in 2017. It was a book that we made in an edition of 50, so it's very small, and we're going to re-release it perhaps in an edition of 250. Not committing anyone who might be watching a live stream to that. But to make it different, we talked about writing an afterword. And the reason that that book was really special and challenging to write an afterword about was because it was a collaboration with my father. And my father had passed away pretty suddenly a couple of months before I started writing the afterword. And so I was rereading the things that he had written. And there's this passage where we're having a conversation, and I'm recording that in the writing from the original edition. And I try to pay him a compliment where I say, you know, I'm really lucky to have you. You're so intelligent. And he says, please, we're too visceral to be intelligent. And I kept thinking about that, and I included in the afterword. And after I wrote that maybe 200-word entry for that book, I just kept thinking about that phrase, too visceral to be intelligent. And I kept wondering how that applies to photo book making, how that applies to editing photographs, how it applies to photographing yourself when you have a chronic illness, and the type of viscerality that is intelligence, but that is also kind of impossible.
I love that. I love this title, and I love this work. And I just want to thank you for inviting me to be here with you tonight. It was sort of a random choice as far as choices go of who to talk to about a photo book. I'm not a photographer, so all your photo questions, I know there are a lot of photo people in here, can wait for the end with Sara. But I'm a writer, and this book does include writing in it. And Sara also said to me when she asked me to be here, I don't really want this to be about photography. I want this to be about what it feels like to be alive and what it feels like to be a person. And I think I was like, yes, I want to talk about what it feels like to be alive. And also, that's what this work does. When I look at this project, it really is about what it feels like to be alive and in a body, and experiencing all of the mundane and beautiful and hard things. So thank you for inviting me here. I wonder if, because you guys can't necessarily see this, I'm sure some of you had a chance to look at it. I wonder if you could kind of give a bit of context for what's happening in these photographs, and a bit about what's happening in your life, or what is happening in your life in the context of these photographs.
So this is a series of photographs that I've been working on for 11 years, and I've had the opportunity to talk about it here at CPW in the past. So I'm going to, I know not everyone was here for that a couple of years ago, but I have multiple sclerosis, which is a disease of the central nervous system. And I have been on medication for that since 2014. And when it began in 2014, I was 25, and it was kind of this unbelievable, impossible thing that I couldn't visualize or imagine how I would continue to do and dream or do much of anything. And I moved back to the Hudson Valley, and didn't tell anyone about what was happening to me or my body, because as I tried to tell people, there's a lot of bad information, confusing information, old information of what it means to have that disease. And I'll just sidebar for a moment to say that this is the best time in history to have MS because the medications are so sophisticated that once you start taking medication, you can ultimately pause the disease where it is and in some cases turn it back. But at the time, all of the old narratives about it were coming forward. And what I was really hungry for was work like what I've made, where someone was looking at themselves as a patient and acknowledging their experience, to put it out there to sort of acknowledge that this isn't actually that unique. It's not that, I don't know, there are lots of people getting infusions for lots of different things. So it took me about, 2014, 5 years to start making this type of self-portrait. The very first time I did use my camera in this capacity was in 2019. I don't remember the exact date, but it was when Anita was 3 months old and I had to have medication at home for the first time after giving birth. And that totally changed my method of making pictures of this experience. And since then, I've been bringing my camera and trying different cameras into the infusion suite with my tripod. I went from going every 28 days to going every 6 months. So the frequency has changed, so the project has changed, but it's an ongoing, I don't know when it will end. I suppose the project will be finished when I'm done being infused. And I had this idea for this accordion book where it just seemed like it was the only thing that made sense. There had to be 3. They had to be like the size of work prints, like 4x6. And originally I told Vlad that I wanted each book to include every single photograph that was made at one of these appointments. And he was very encouraging. But then when I put them all into folders, one of these sessions was like 200 or just shy of 200. And then it became evident that we didn't need 200 images from one session of medication to get the point across. And so we came back to 30 images. So each book is 30 panels. And on the verso, there is writing because not everything, not that much about what it's like to be a patient in the infusion suite can be captured by the photograph. There are lots of things that are said that are pretty wild, that I felt like it was important to share. And the last thing I want to say about these books is that I had this idea for the form, but it was a highly collaborative process with Vlad, because Vlad, who is a poet by training, I hope you don't mind me saying that wherever you are out there, I really gave him agency to look at the text that I shared with you and to respond to the text and lay it out in the way that made sense. So we wound up from there. He laid it out in this first volume. I think of it as the first volume, but there is no order. And then in each following volume, the text gets erased. And then by the third volume, erased a little more. And that felt really authentic to me because of how it's hard to remember all that's happened.
I'm obsessed with the way that you collaborated with Vlad because I watched it happen over the last couple of months, you making this book with him and heard about the process as it went on. And I was really inspired by the trust that you had in your collaborator. And I wondered and you speak a bit to the concept of trust in relationship to illness in the text here. I'm wondering if this type of trust, which I saw as this incredible ability to let go of your project, which for me, who's like, in any writing project I've done, if an editor like messes with my work, I like immediately reflexively feel like defensive. And So I loved watching you be able to, you told me, oh, Vlad's going to choose the pieces of text that appear in the book. And there's a whole Google Doc that had all of these bits of text. So much was there. And you gave it over to him to decide what ended up in here. And then also to decide what happened, how it was presented. And he also helped find that erasure format, which was a really cool format that you described, where words were then kind of erased as you went through the volumes. I wonder if you could speak a little bit to trust, and if you've always had that, is that ability to let go in that way something that you've developed over time, or in relationship to this work in particular?
A little bit of both. This work is really difficult for me to comb through for reasons that I feel must be obvious, but probably are not that obvious. It's really hard to look at self-portraits of oneself. It's really hard to see yourself being sick or in moments of extreme sickness. It's really hard to determine which photograph is the right one. And so with this work in particular, I have sort of thrown it at other people and asked them what they've thought, to varying success. But I think part of what I love about bookmaking is that I have been able to come up with an idea, and in my experience, the object that is the outcome of the effort of making a book has only been richer and better because I've brought someone in to the process. That's not always the case. There are a lot of people who think that all of their ideas must be done to the exact measure of their vision. But I just don't feel that way. I feel like I just enjoy being with other people and making it together. It feels a bit cheesy as I'm saying it right now. But it feels like that exchange of making the book together is a part of what I really value.
It's amazing. You can feel that in the work too. I wondered if you might be comfortable reading, or we could each read some of the ones that we can see.
Oh,
if
that's fun.
helpful. Is that cool?
Yeah, I thought about
Yeah, just because I think it's a good way for people that can't see this up close to hear a bit of this text, because
Yeah.
it really does, like you were describing earlier, like actually I also want to hear from you about what you think about this, like where the possibilities of photography ended and writing had to come in.
Yeah.
Like why introducing writing was crucial in this project. But we'll talk about that. But first, we'll each read a couple of these just to give a taste of the text in this book.
Okay. I begin monthly infusions of a third-line biologic drug to manage multiple sclerosis. The medication is regarded as the most efficacious method of defense from relapse, creating an ongoing state of remission while working to repair lesions that have already laid claim to the myelin of my brain and spinal cord cells. My doctor explains that efficacy is contingent on continued and uninterrupted treatment. We will try this method of care for a while and see how it goes. I think about the we in his statements and wonder if in another context, we could be friends. He underscores the medication's ability to produce the desired and intended results require a commitment to the recommended infusion schedule, once every 28 days. In the kingdom of the sick, fear, uncertainty, trust, and patience rule over us. My mind is inundated with information from the nurses. The boundaries are jagged. I see these women more often than many of my closest friends. They talk about their political views, their ailing parents, their deceased spouses, their disappointments in their own children, and offer advice on my personal family planning. One nurse tells me that it's important to have more than one child. Children need companions. She says, once the parents are dead, the children only have each other. She urges me not to worry about debt. She says we are all in debt, that we will never pay off, so there's no need to worry about having the imagined financial resources to provide for a child before having children. You can choose. My turn.
Some words that I love that I use to relate to sickness, care, and patience. Avoidance, efficacious, foibles, sanguine, sickness, care, and patience. I think about what is mundane and how it is determined by one's perspective and experience. I keep thinking of Eggleston, his seminal work, but also the photographs he made in Japan. I think of myself consuming these photographs and the feeling of his work in Japan, feeling so apart yet so close to the Eggleston I know. I wonder if I can connect the medical photographs I make to the photographs Eggleston made as a tourist. I think about what it means to consume and create culture and fail to find one's genealogy within the history of their medium. I'm going to pause here because these last two pieces of text, like I have so many questions about or thoughts about them. And I wonder if, first of all, I've found it interesting how you really came up against like a void of this kind of work out there. Can you talk about the experience of like trying to find people making work about this and what you did find about illness and what you did find and what you couldn't find and what that felt like?
So when I started looking, it was 2014, which feels important to mention because after the pandemic began, there was a lot of different types of work being made. But in 2014, when I began looking, I went to the Cranbrook Library, which is in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. I went to the New York Public Library, and I went to a photo book bookstore, and I was really looking specifically, I was talking to a dealer and asking about people. When I left the libraries, I was talking to a dealer and asking about someone looking at themselves with the camera. And there were some examples of people with cancer doing this, but often what I was finding was someone else being an observer and more of that kind of documenting this experience of someone else. There are a few examples, again, of this kind of experience of cancer and how that affects the body. But in 2014, I had this very self-assured feeling that cancer was not a chronic condition. And even if it was the one that we know the most about. So I really wanted something else. My view on that has changed since because it absolutely is a chronic condition. But at the time, I just was so upset for a lot of reasons, more than just not finding what I was looking for. Mm-hmm. But I was also making really different kinds of pictures, and someone who I really admire had been talking to me for years about how my work looked so much like Eggleston in Japan, and I could never find that book or any of those works. So I just would kind of go off in my imagination and think about that.
You talk in that bit of text about Eggleston, you talk about the idea of the mundane. And as I was thinking about this talk, I was thinking about when I have in my work and writing work tried to capture and convey the mundane on the page. And my last book was about a young woman who is a new mother, and I wanted to present in writing like what it genuinely felt like to be doing the very mundane labor that is involved in early motherhood. And so I was like writing the like pages and pages and pages of like, then she took down her nursing bra strap and tried to get the baby to latch. And then she took down her other nursing bra strap over and over, trying to get the texture of like, what does it actually feel like? And then of course my editor was like, but this is boring. And I was like, but that's the point. The point is that that I'm trying to get at what it feels like to live through this, right? To like live through this thing that is mundane and yes, maybe boring. And I wonder if you could speak to how you figure the mundane into, because you're in these medicalized spaces that are, I imagine, boring until you make something out of them. Do you want to talk about the mundane in your mind?
Well, they're boring to me, but they are really triggering to other people because everyone has a different experience of this space. But I suppose it felt really important to try and make a space where, I mean, I know some people who have never even had blood drawn. And so I want to create work where I can begin to show that this is a regular experience for some, that it is mundane for some. But on the flip side of that, in 2021, I changed infusion centers, and I realized that the place that had been so familiar to me was like going from the setting for the Flintstones to the Jetsons in my new infusion suite, because it's just really different. Like, not all of the settings are the same. And going to a very quaint, hospital in Cornwall, New York, is not the same as going to an infusion suite on 10th Avenue. Neither is the music. So
They play music in the suites?
the one on 10th Avenue plays jazz.
Oh, calming.
Yeah.
The other M word I want to talk about is maintenance. There's a piece in the text. We can also read the rest of the text if we want at any given point, but there's a piece in the text that the text just says, "This is maintenance." And it came forward to me when thinking about it today, because last night I got in like a little tizzy where I was like freaking out to my husband about how, since we have small children, like I have no time to make work anymore, and I'm not a writer anymore, and how can I do this? And then he, as a way to make me feel better, he showed me this short video of Mirla Letterman Ukele's, probably saying her name wrong, who talked about basically having the gumption to turn maintenance into art. And I thought about how this is like what you're doing here a bit.
That's very flattering.
She's
amazing.
She's incredible. She's incredible. But like, whether it's the maintenance of child rearing, she makes so much work about that, and then, or the maintenance of medical maintenance.
Yeah.
I guess, do you have any like thoughts on what does that mean to you to be documenting like the maintenance of life?
So this response feels like it is most important to the students in the room. At a certain point, I've always had a full-time job since I was diagnosed and needed to figure out how to pay for this medication. And once that began, it took me a really long time to figure out how I was going to make anything. And something that was celebrated about my way of working when I was a student was that I was, quote, able to make photographs anywhere. And when I became my most frustrated working these 40 to 50 hour weeks, which it's not that bad, really. Some people say they work 80-hour weeks, and that's not my experience. But I just realized that I had to figure out a system. And the system was, for a long time, every 28 days in this infusion suite, because I realized this is where I am and I can make work where I am. And that was studio time. And at first, this whole experience is not that shocking to me now, but when I started, it was a really hard transition, and it was embarrassing and frightening. And now I look at it more like taking a vitamin, where a vitamin is its own maintenance. putting lotion on your hands is maintenance. Getting blood drawn, having a CAT scan. They seem really foreign and scary, and sometimes they are, but the scariest part about them is often the price tag.
Absolutely. You just said the word embarrassing, and it dovetails with something else I wanted to ask you about, which is something you also write about in here, which is the idea of shame and how you ran up against this sense of shame especially when you were first diagnosed. And in the text, it talks about how in this society, we often talk about or think about illness or don't talk about illness in the same way that we don't talk about money. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about shame and how, if art or photo making was a way to directly combat that feeling, or was it a way further into that feeling, or was it, I guess, how did it relate?
I think it was a direct response. And it feels important to also say in my answer to that, when I started making these pictures, I didn't think I would ever show them to anyone. They were for me, and it was a way for me to be engaged with myself and my practice in this space where I was passive and really at the mercy. I had to trust all of the nursing staff. And trust is hard sometimes in those spaces. And so this impulse to make these pictures was for an audience of me. And at some point that changed. I've lost track of the question you asked, but
it was about shame.
Yeah, I think making these photographs and having to look at myself when I was nursing my daughter and I had this medication, my first thought was, I have no idea what this looks like. This feels crazy. And I don't think I had that shame until I saw the photographs. So it was kind of like this circular.
Interesting.
Kind of like the form of the book, this kind of merry-go-round.
I don't know much of your work before this body of work. I met you like after you already were working in this way. Have you always made portraits or self-portraits, or is this completely new from the point of starting this work?
I made a student project when I was 19 where I photographed myself in all of my mom's nightgowns, including some lingerie.
Amazing.
And then I didn't photograph myself until I was 25. It's actually not that long. That's 6 years? It felt like a long space between 19 and 25, but no, I was not working in this way at all.
I mean, the photos are arresting in a lot of them. There's such clear and direct eye contact with the camera or the viewer. And how do you see yourself when you look at these or when you make them? Does it change the way you feel about yourself, or does it feel empowering, or does it feel crazy? Or
it feels kind of crazy. But I look right into the camera typically because I imagine it to be like looking in a mirror, and I really want to see what it looks like. And it's been I had the opportunity to share this work in a pretty widely consumable way, which made me realize that there were a lot of other people that were looking for this type of kinship or way of relating to other people who have regular medical needs or limitations. And that exchange and relationship building with people through having shared this work makes me feel like it's even more important to keep going.
I love that. Maybe we can pause our talk for a sec to invite other questions if other people have them. I can bring this, or maybe I can't bring this to people. I don't know.
Can I bring you the mic, Robert? Or I guess as far as it will go.
Hello. My name's Robert.
Hi, Robert.
Yeah, and I was my thoughts just toward the end of the last conversation had to do with the fact that self-portraiture and writing itself seem to have a kind of symbiosis about them, and that had the writing always been a part of your process as a photographer, or did it kind of segue into this particular work more apparent to you?
Thank you. It segued in a really strong way with this process. In part because when I showed these pictures to someone for the first time, I was really uncomfortable by the assumptions and assertions they were making about what was going on here, and I needed to clarify that. But then beyond that, and I say this with respect to the nursing profession, I really couldn't believe some of the things that people were saying to me and around me. And I really felt like that had to have a place somewhere in what I've always imagined to be the book.
Does anyone else want to ask any questions?
Hi, Doc. My question, I don't think you mentioned it, but I'm curious about like the decision-making process to make this book like accordion style. I heard you talk about it in class, which was cool. And I was surprised. I was like, what's that on the table? And then I was like, oh, that's the book. So.
So maybe 5 years into getting infusions, I invited my husband to come with me for the first time. And he watched me make these portraits with my camera and my remote. And he didn't really say much, as far as I can remember, until it was over. And he said, "You should really be making video of this, because it's like you're dancing with the camera and with the IV pole." And I really bristled at that because I was like, oh, I have to set up another camera and another tripod. And then I realized I could do it on my phone, and I made these videos, and they're interesting. But I kept thinking about recreating that in book form. And this is kind of an easy solution. And I say that with a lot of respect to bookmakers. An easy solution because it allows this kind of choreography of movement across 30 panels, 30 images. And in one of the books, so there's one book on the table here and the other two are on a table on the other side of the Ocean Vuong wall. As we were putting the other one of the three together, Vlad said to me, hey, can we look and make sure that these two aren't repeats, that they are actually different images, because some of them are really similar. And so it kind of felt like stretching a moment of motion across 30 panels, like a flip book. When you're a kid, you get like those $1 flip books where you can watch an animation across all the frames. That's what I was thinking about.
Speaking of decision making, can we hear a little bit about the decision to make the book into 3 books?
It was a pretty visceral decision. I don't know. It just kind of came to me, and once Vlad and I started talking, I thought if it was a crazy idea, maybe he would say so. So it wasn't crazy.
And then it ended up being integral to the way the text progressed.
Mhm.
So yeah, I feel like the layering of decision making here was really interesting and organic, but then ended up feeling like that's how it had to be.
Yeah, and I want to mention like the full cache of images. There are 13,000 or so pictures in the archive of this, and so it's very overwhelming in a few different ways to try and really figure out what I'm doing here with the work, not what I'm doing here. But I'm preparing to make a monograph of these pictures, and it felt really important with this opportunity that was generously given to me by Arts Mid-Hudson to think about what does it mean to be too visceral, to be intelligent? What does it mean to have 13,000 pictures? What does it mean to be well enough to make things? And just trusting in the process and choosing great collaborators.
Thank you. You just sort of elaborate on how many images this is, and I'm assuming that's how many, like over a decade of, what's 2 decades of, right? No, a decade of photographing yourself during these infusions. How did you decide on these 3 particular days? What is the significance of one with Anita as a baby, another alone, another with the person who's caring for you? Yeah.
Thank you for that question. This one felt important because it was the first time I put my camera on the tripod and the first time in many years where I made a horizontal picture. So this felt important to really honor as something that changed and started the whole project. The other 2, it was just intuitive. I like the 3rd book because I like the way that the nurse's hair wrap looks in the frame. And the other one, which is a suite of images where I'm trying to interact with the hospital curtain. And I kept getting the IV line bent, trying to make some kind of motion picture. And I just kept thinking about being in that room and interacting with the curtain. And it has nothing to do with the interaction between the 3. It was just more about which were most interesting or curious to me.
Anyone else have any questions?
Hi, I was wondering, did you ever go back and say, on this day I saw something and I didn't quite capture it the way I wanted to, and another day you made an effort to recapture it? Also, I have another couple of questions. Do you address the sensation of the infusion? And did that become like a studio time for you, that you said, okay, I'm going to start here. I'm not sure how long it would take, an hour or 45 minutes, and I want to get this amount of work done, or you just let the day present itself?
Well, the answer to the first question was just yes. And the answer to the second question is that I definitely used it as studio time. I created what I call a system where as soon as I had the IV line started, I would set up my tripod and get to work until the pharmacist brought up the meds. Then I'd take a break and then I'd keep going. And I'd go for as long as I had energy to go. And typically it's like a maybe 80 square foot bay, small. And I just think, how do I do something different than I did the last time? And then I tried things. I brought a flash, whole sort of a lot of flash equipment, and it was upsetting to other people. And I realized that's a line I'm not willing to cross, because I think it's also important to mention there's not privacy. Where I go, they're curtains, and then later they're just bays. And when I was going to the infusion center in Cornwall, which is in Orange County, there was this really funny dialogue between the patients where it was kind of a comparison of the economy of what is your illness and who has it worse. And just based on my age, no matter who I was talking to and what their situation, they always had pity for me. And all of those interchanges affected what was happening in the pictures. Because sometimes, not in any of these three, but sometimes I would try to photograph the people across the curtain in ways that, didn't reveal anything about them, but because we were all there. And I found that I was making these photographs that kind of erased the fact that there were all these other people there. So it was tricky. And that's also why it has been important to include the writing to acknowledge that this is a space. I also think it might be different in both of the environments where I've gone, where there are just not that many people. Because I've talked to other clinicians where they say they have like 50 patients in the infusion suite at any given time. And that's never been my experience as a patient. I'd probably make different pictures there, if any at all.
Any last questions?
You were talking about initially looking for photographers whose work were around their own chronic illnesses, and then you didn't find any who would be working with MS. How would you have used that work around yours? And have you find any literary description or literary work that was around chronic illness that you used?
I think I was just looking for it to feel less alone. I don't know how I would have used it, but I just was looking for a genealogy, which is a word I use in the writing, like a genealogy of where to situate myself from that point forward. I have found literary examples. The one that comes to mind, two come to mind. The first one I found is this woman. She was a naturalist, and as she became more disabled, she really leaned into herself as a poet, and her name is Lucia Perillo. And then the second example is this novel I just read called Flashlight by Susan Choi. Really excellent book that was recommended by a friend. And it's the best description of a person with MS that I've ever read. And I was so curious, does this author have MS? So I just did the smallest amount of research, and I found that her mother has MS. Any other questions?
Do you want to talk about anything else that we didn't talk about, Sarah?
There is one question in the back. I don't think the mic will go that far. Thank you so much for coming.
Hey.
Hi.
So notwithstanding that you're still an artist and you still very much, are going through these journeys, but specifically in retrospect, as an artist compiling, and then as a person, as the subject that went through these things, just curious, what did you learn about yourself, or what did the project reveal to you?
I'm still figuring that out. Really, I guess what it reveals to me is that I wish people just talked about this stuff more. because part of why there's so much shame and embarrassment and shock when people do get sick and die is because we're just not talking about it. But that doesn't have much to do with my work specifically. That just has to do with culture.
Anyone else?
So just as a follow-up to the last question, has anything changed in the way you are as a photographer, in the way you make photographs from this process that you've been doing?
Thank you for that question. Yes, I had figured it out really, like it was dialed in. And I was only making pictures within this system. So I needed to figure out how to break the system, which is a different challenge. And I've tried many things, and I have broken out of this sort of box that I created in order to work. And one way of doing that was I brought a view camera into the infusion suite, which just didn't work on many levels. But I've had to relearn how to make photographs outside of the hospital. And it's going well. It's not a sad story, but it's just been interesting to notice that once you get so used to a process, you have to break out of that process.
I love that description because it's like with making anything, it's like you need constraints and you have to build the constraints or have them built around you, and then you have to break them. And it's always that cycle again and again. I saw one other person that had a question in the back.
You can somehow take it as a question. I just think, let me see if I can word it how I want to say, but it's like, because this is something, the word mundanity came up, and I just feel like what I love about the work, and I love the work, I think it's exceptional work, is not so much what it's about, but more that you had to go and do these and have these infusions, and you had to go and park your car, and you had to go and work through your health insurance, and you had to go and like we all have things we all have to do, and we have to do them daily. And when we lose interest or we're unable to kind of see the poetry, or poetry is maybe not quite the right word, but the validity or the way it's other people are gonna understand. Other people are gonna, like, if I say, like, it's amazing, like I'll say something like, how many times did I put the chair under the table in a day? How many times do I pull the chair out? And people are just like, wow, like it's just this way of illuminating life as it is for you.
Sweet
And so I feel like the focus on illness, which is true to you, and we've all been ill at different times, or we're afraid of being ill, or we've had parents who've been ill, or loved one, but it's also just the integrity of like your life and the day-to-day of it, and that I find very empowering in the work and also as like an artist.
Thank you, Ruth. And as you were saying that, I was just thinking about how the day-to-dayness of sweeping and the presence of that in photographs that you've made. And I don't mean that trivially. I mean that sincerely. It's just what we all have to do. And that looks different. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
If you would like to purchase a book, there are some copies available here tonight. You can also spend time looking at the books and not buying them if that's not what you'd like to do. There's one here, There are two on the other side of this wall. They are rather delicate, so if you pick them up, just be careful. They can fall in many directions.